So in this video, I just want to show you a couple ways that you can customize Soundminer. We've hinted at some of these earlier in the little crash course we just did, but if you skipped over that, this video might be useful to you to just show you some of the options you have to make Soundminer kind of look and feel how you want. Some of these may not be known to everybody using Soundminer. Some of these will. So again, if you have Soundminer exactly how you want, how it looks and the colors and everything like that, the fonts and the toolbar, then you can pretty much skip this video. But if you're new to Soundminer, I just want to show you some of the options that you do have in sort of controlling what Soundminer looks like. So here I have, again, my pretty much standard Soundminer installation. I have sort of records showing, and we mentioned things like in the crash course how to do some layout changes. But I'm going to just show it all again very quickly just to mention it. Again, I can resize and reorder the columns here. I can store layouts by hitting Option and storing them. Again, we're going to talk about this much more in layout, so I'm not going to hint over this too much here, but just know that you can adjust these things. I can decide what views, what columns I want to actually view, so I can turn on different columns like location. So we know that. I can also come in here and customize the toolbar. If I right-click on the toolbar and say Customize it, you'll see that there's a set of icons that represent different things in Soundminer, and there's actually quite a few more that I could pull up if I want. I can also add sort of spaces and sort of space these things out. I can really change the look of the title bar here. I can pull things off of it that I don't want, and I could put them back on if I do want. So it's possible that I could come in here and literally remove everything from the title bar, which is fairly foolish, but just to show that if you got to this point and you really couldn't figure out how to get back, I can do that, and then I can simply drag this entire default set back onto the bar like this. So if I click this and drop it up here, now I have back basically the default bar that Soundminer came with. Just a couple things to note here. The flexible space basically fills in everything from the left area to the right area. So if I remove this, you could see I could start adding spaces in here to try and space this out. But instead, whatever tool set I have on this side, I could put the flexible space in between, and I can put in between wherever I want, and it will basically push everything to the far edges. So here's my default databases and column fields, and here's the other icons. So flexible space will sort of separate that out. And if I wanted to add some more things that I use, they simply get dragged up and I can put them wherever I want. And we'll look at some of these later, but they're basically ways to get at all the different functions of Soundminer. I mostly use the hotkeys because I know them, I've memorized them, but you could basically put things up here to have easy access, especially if you don't remember the hotkeys. So I won't go through what all of these are. Some of them are related to server databases and Soundminer servers and things like that. But just know that you can come in here and you can customize these things. You can also tell it to use the icon plus the text. So if you could tell you exactly what they were, or the text only if you really wanted to have a really minimalized view like that. I usually just leave it to icon. And you can also tell it to use a smaller size as well. If you really needed more real estate up here, you can tell it to use the small versions of the icons. So as I'm getting older and my eyes are slowly failing, I realize that I want to change the font size. Well, if I hold down Command period, call up the Soundminer menu and say Preferences, I can come down here to the fonts as we mentioned in the first video, and I can actually just change the height of each row, and I can change the font size. So I can make fonts as big or as small as I want. I wouldn't recommend changing the default font because it's sometimes hard to get back to this if you realize you liked what was there. This font is sort of built into Soundminer, I think, and if you change it to something else, I'm not positive you can come back here and just easily select it. You can see that it's not even in the list. So if I change this off of this default sans serif font, I won't be able to get back that exact font again. Also, if I'm viewing the mini waveforms, which I'm going to mention elsewhere, I can control the size of those as well. So the height and the width of the mini waveforms is adjustable as well right here, and the color of it. So speaking of colors, let's say I want to modify the colors that Soundminer is using. Well, I actually have full control over pretty much all the colors that Soundminer uses. Again, if I go to my preferences and go over here to the color tab, you can see that I can adjust pretty much all the colors for various things in Soundminer. The background color, the text colors, the selection colors, things like that. So here, the selected highlight color. If I go in here and I just change that, you'll see that almost instantly I can see that now I'm using green as my selected color. I can change all of this. Soundminer does have some presets built in, such as here's the basic default for V5. Here was the color scheme in 4.5, which is available still. There's a light theme, which basically has a light background and different colors. There's also the classic theme, which is if you're very bold. But I can also export my own color presets and import color presets. So I could take this if I wanted to. Let's say I made some changes to this and I changed some different colors here, and I really want to store this for later because, I mean, who doesn't want to look at that all day? If I came here and said to export current colors, I could basically put it on the desktop and say, don't use this color scheme. And if I reset my color to something else, I could come back here to import colors, find that file. There's the one that I just selected, and I could open it, and basically it resets all those colors. So I've basically set one that I usually use, which is all pretty much gray. It's easy on my eyes. And you can see this is the color scheme that I'm normally using. And I have it saved out so that no matter what happens, if I accidentally screw something up, I can always get back to import that. We'll put this back to the normal V5 scheme for now. Under database order, you can control which order the databases show up in your drop-down list. So by putting anything above the yellow line, they will always appear first. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are always going to be the first databases when I select this list here. If I make a change to that, I can move this database to the very top, and now you'll see that that database is always going to appear in the top of my list. Pretty useful when you have lots and lots of databases. Anything below the line simply sorts alphabetically after the first ones that you've sort of forced to go first. So again, here I see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the next just sort alphabetically. Again, you can do the same thing with fields. Here are all the fields that are in this database that are available to me. I can actually tell Soundminer my preferred fields, the ones that I'm likely to be working with all of the time. So in this case, let's say I have library, and I know that I'm going to always want to work with library. So I put it above the line, and then I'm going to take category and category full and cat ID, and I can arrange these however I want. So I can take the file name, and I can take designer and composer. You get the idea. What this is going to do is that in certain places in Soundminer, it's always going to show me these fields first in certain drop-downs. And we'll see that more later when we get into doing some metadata work. But just know that by default, all the fields will usually present themselves to you in alphabetical order. But just like the databases, you can force certain ones of them to always appear at the top of these lists that are going to appear later. So the most useful fields to you might want to come in here and put above the line and put them in the order that you want. They don't have to be alphabetical, right? So I could put library at the top and then cat ID, then category. If you're someone who uses artwork and likes to use the artwork in your database, there's a few ways that you can display the artwork as well. I just want to show you. You can turn on the column that actually says artwork, which I can basically resize a little bit. All the artwork is just a thumbnail. It's a very small version, but you can actually view the artwork for these various things right in a column view. You can also basically turn on the artwork in the waveform browser down below. So when I select a sound, I can see the artwork here, and that's actually a preference. It's under the waveform preferences to view the artwork. So I can toggle that on or off if I want to see the artwork right next to the waveform. And of course, you also have the window, show artwork window, which will show you a larger and scalable version of the artwork itself that's attached to that file. You could keep this on another monitor if you really wanted to see a large view of it. One more thing that's useful to a lot of people, it's not something that I particularly use, is called visualize play history. So by default, if I play a sound and I move on to another sound, it doesn't really give me indication here of what sound that I've played. There's a preference that's called visualize play history. And now when I turn it on, after I play a sound, that sound takes on a different color. You can see that I hit play, and as soon as I hit stop, it's changed the color as soon as it starts to play. This is a way to tell me that I've actually listened to these sounds already. So if you're doing a search and you're trying to audition a bunch of sounds, it might be useful for you to know which ones you've listened to and which ones you haven't. So that's visualize play history. I tend to leave it off myself. And you'll see that unchecking it just clears that. One other thing you might want to turn on is word wrap. Let's say I have some descriptions here that go way beyond what I can display in the sort of width that I have this column right now. So I can see that these little dots are telling me, these ellipses are telling me that there's more to this description than I can currently see. Well, I can either resize this column out to get all of it, but let's say I want to keep this a little bit shorter, but I want to basically have it wrap the words down to another line. Well, I can come to the preferences and I can turn on word wrap. But you'll see that when I do, nothing really happens. I still can't see the second part of that line. That's because my row height has to be increased to actually show me that. So now if I come back to my preferences, go down here to row height and start increasing it in size, at some point it will become big enough to show me that second line of text. It looks like I have to get across about 50. There you go. And now you see it. So now it's wrapping the description down to the next part of the line. And you can see that's also applying here to location. It's wrapping that. So it's going to wrap anything that it basically can't fit in the width. So if I decrease the width, you see that it starts to wrap that down to the next line. And if I simply come in here and turn off word wrap, you'll see that my column height, or my row height, stays the same. It's still set big, but it's just no longer wrapping that line down to the next space. So at this point, I might as well come back in here and reduce this back down, because there's no point in having it that big if I'm not going to wrap the lines. So those are just some ways that you can customize the view of Soundminer. Again, I'm not going to go much more in depth than that, but I did just want to point out some of those because I think that there are things that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of, especially things like the colors and the font sizes and things. If you're new to Soundminer, you might not be aware that you can control those in the toolbar.